Dave Downs is here with Brian Smith again. November, compliance, wrapping up the year. I have a feeling, Brian, this podcast is going to be all about tips. Something about tips. Am I right or wrong?
You are right.
I knew it. I know. We planned these out a little bit more than that. We're talking about the 2020 final rule on the, tip final rule on the 80/20 guidance, not to be confused with the 80/27 form that is coming right around the corner in January. So let's get a little background first. What can you tell me about the existing rules for the 80/20?
Well, and don't forget about the dual jobs. That's really
dual
important.
jobs. Yeah.
Yep, dual jobs and 80/20 guidance go together and kind of confused everybody, is what I'm thinking. But,
Cool.
To give you some background on the existing rules, it's since 1967, the Department of Labor's dual jobs regulation has stated that an employee may be employed both in a tipped and in a non-tipped occupation simultaneously. And that in this dual job situation, the employee is a tipped employee only while the employee is employed in the tipped occupation. And that employer may only take a tip credit against its minimum wage obligations for the time the employee spends in that tipped occupation. At the same time, the department's regulation also stated that an employee employed in a tipped occupation may perform related duties that are not themselves direct toward producing tips, thus distinguishing between employees who have dual jobs and tipped employees who perform related duties that do not themselves produce tips.
We're going to need clarification on this. I know we'll get there, but my head's spinning.
Oh, I'm sure it is, and everyone's head was spinning. That's why there's new rules to this, right? The 80/20 guidance stated that if a tipped employee performs too many related duties, the employee is no longer engaged in a tip occupation, essentially stating that if an employee spends more than 20% of the work week on non-tip related duties, that employee is no longer engaged in a tip producing job function and must be paid the full minimum wage.
Okay. All right. I'm starting to get it. Why was there any changes needed to this? You said it goes back to 1967?
Yeah.
This is 50 years old, man. Over 50 years old. Let's go. Why?
So a change is needed to clarify the difference between an employee that truly has two jobs within the restaurant, one tipped and one non-tipped, right? And a tipped employee that performs different job duties throughout their shifts. And secondly, the Department of Labor determined that the 80/20 guidance that they had published was difficult for employers to administer and led to confusion, in part because employers lacked guidance to determine whether a particular non-tipped duty is related to the tip-producing occupation, right?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And there were also circuit courts that found the guidance difficult to interpret and inconsistent with the FLSA's goal of promoting fair working conditions. So it was not only employers, but it was also courts found this guidance difficult to interpret and enforce.
Okay, so let's put this into a real life restaurant example. Hourly employee, tipped employee, server. How could they be simultaneously employed as a tipped and a non-tipped employee?
Well, in that dual jobs regulation, you and I both know that that can't happen. But the Department of Labor thought that if a server was doing tipped and non-tipped duties at the same time, they were essentially working two jobs at the exact same time.
Okay, so that would be like side work, like rolling silverware or something, and also waiting tables. Correct. At the end of a shift or something, right before the restaurant closes.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay. Now, since there are changes, finally, after these nearly 55 years or so, what is the Department of Labor hoping to accomplish with all of these updates and changes to the rules?
Well, the goal of this final rule is to protect tipped employees.
Sure.
While also providing clarity and flexibility to employers and courts to address the variable situations that arise in tipped occupations, because there is just no straight black or white answer. It doesn't happen in this industry.
Yeah, I know. It's always gray area in there.
Mm-hmm.
Would this apply for every restaurant in the country, or would there be people that this wouldn't apply to?
Well, this is a federal rule, so
Okay.
it would not be impactful in all states. And for example, the state of Washington and California, they're just two states that I chose. Those two states do not allow employers to pay employees a tip credit wage.
Right.
And those employees, the front of the house and back of the house, are to be paid the same minimum wage. So there's no tip credit. So if you were in California and you were a server being paid full minimum wage, your supervisor, your manager could ask you to do basically some kitchen work if you were going to be paid because you're paid the full minimum wage.
Interesting. Okay. So anywhere where there is not a tip credit, this law may not apply or these updated rules may not apply because there is no tip credit that it would apply to. That totally
Correct.
makes sense. I get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's just rip the Band-Aid off then. What is the new rule? How's it go?
All right. So first, and this one's seems pretty simple, but they needed to put it in here. But if an employee has two jobs, one tipped and one non-tipped, the non-tipped job obviously cannot be paid a tip credit wage. If you're a cook, you're paid the full minimum wage. If you're a server, you can be paid a tip credit wage. Seems pretty simple, but like I said, the prior rule was not exactly straightforward. And secondly, in order for a tipped employee to be paid a tip credit wage for their entire shift, that employee during their entire shift is either performing work that produces tips or is performing work that directly supports the production of tips, provided that the directly supporting work is not performed for a substantial amount of time.
And that's the 80/20, right?
You got that.
Okay.
A server receives tips for waiting on guests' tables, not cleaning the restaurant, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
Did you fall asleep there?
No, I didn't know that was a question directed at me, but we're good. So let's clarify then a little bit more. We got to keep drilling into this. What would be considered tip producing work?
So tip producing work is work that provides service to customers for which tipped employees receive tips. Pretty simple, right?
Right.
So some examples of tip producing work include obviously table service,
Sure.
taking orders, making recommendations to guests, recommending the wine steak pairing, and then of serving food and drink. Those are examples of tip producing work.
Understood. Okay, so then we got to clarify then what's directly supporting tip producing work. What are the things that go into that?
So directly supporting work is work that is either performed in preparation of or otherwise assists the tipped employees' tip producing work. For example, dining room prep work, such as refilling salt and pepper shakers and ketchup bottles, rolling silverware, folding napkins, sweeping or vacuuming under tables in the dining area, and setting and bussing tables. Those are directly supporting work. If you don't have a clean table, you can't get a new table and you can't make tips. If your table is dirty, well, that's not going to look good to the guests, and you want to make sure that the area that they're sitting in and eating is nice and clean. So those, even though sounds kind of like additional maintenance and work, but those are all directly supporting work that helps a server, bartender earn more tips, right?
Right.
If you were sitting at a table and you had hot French fries and you couldn't get ketchup from your server, by the time they did get that ketchup to you, your fries were cold. Well, that's going to reduce your tips. So if you'd filled the ketchup bottle prior, you'd have been prepared to make those tips, right?
Understood. So it all comes down to preparation time. So then they also say it cannot be performed for a substantial amount of time.
You are
Let's
correct.
get some
Don't
clarity
ever
around
forget
this.
that.
Yeah, the substantial
No.
amount of time. So each one of these little segments need to be defined first, and then we'll kind of clarify exactly what it means. What is considered a substantial amount of time?
So an employee has performed directly supporting work for a substantial amount of time If the tipped employee's directly supporting work either exceeds 20% of the hours worked during the employee's work week,
Okay.
or is performed for a continuous period of time that exceeds 30 minutes.
I'm going to see if I can't come up with an example here, and before we jump into the next question. So let's say I'll just use an example of a high-end cocktail bar, right? They're really producing some fancy cocktails, and the bartender comes in. They're only open from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. 4-hour shift is when they're typically open for business, serving guests, slinging drinks across the bar. They come in at 5 p.m. for 2 hours ahead of time, and they don't get out of there from after cleaning until let's say 12:30 p.m. or 12:30 a.m. the next day. This is going to be considered a substantial amount of time that they are spending in either prep work, getting ready for their shift, or cleaning the restaurant afterwards, and that would kind of kick them out of violation or into violation of this particular new rule, right?
Absolutely. In that situation, the employer would not be able to take a tip credit for that time spent before and after their shift. Zach,
Prepping for their shift. Yeah, just
prepping for their shift.
Getting the stuff ready. Yeah, interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay, cutting citrus and making juices and whatever else they may be doing. Really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was really good that DOL actually put a time limit on there, because before it was just arbitrary, and there was nothing specific about the amount of time that an employee can spend prepping for their shift.
Yeah. So they put that time limit of 30 minutes on there. What happens if an employee is still rolling silverware 45 minutes after a shift is ended?
Well, same situation as the bartender. That employee that's rolling silverware for 45 minutes would need to be paid the full federal minimum wage for that entire 45 minutes.
Not just 30, not just 15 of those 45. It's the entirety of those 45 minutes. Anything longer than 30 is considered full pay, not tip credit.
Exactly. When they go past that 30 minutes, that 30 minutes is included in the time that they needed to be paid full minimum wage. So in my example, they rolled silverware for 45 minutes after their shift. They're paid the full minimum wage for 45 minutes, not 45 minutes minus 30 minutes.
Got it. Okay, so they have to apply it. If it's longer than 30, all of that is considered a substantial amount of time.
You got it.
Perfect. What are some examples then of something that is not tip producing or directly supporting tipped work? There's got to be some kind of in this little gray area here. There has to be some activities in those two.
Absolutely. In the law, states this plain and simple, that preparing food, including salads, and cleaning the kitchen or bathrooms is not part of the tipped occupation of a server. Cleaning the dining room or bathroom is not part of the tipped occupation of anyone in the restaurant.
Really interesting. And then finally, I guess the new rule is rolling down the hill. When does this take effect? When does this go into law?
This is effective at the end of the year, December 28th, 2021.
So not even December 31st. This takes place before. Yeah, a couple days before, huh?
Yeah.
Brian Smith, really interesting stuff. Any suggestions or any ways that you would recommend our clients begin kind of tracking some of this on the side? Is it literally clocking out and clocking back in as a new job code when they know that it's been there, or adjusting time clocks to reflect this accurately?
Well, I think if someone is working 2 jobs, they absolutely should clock in and out. If you come in for a server shift and let's say it's dead for the day, and your manager's saying, do you want to stay and do some cleaning? And you say, yes, I need some money. You would clock out of that tipped job code and clock in under some type of maintenance job code that was the full minimum wage. So I think that when they do actually have 2 jobs, yes, you need to clock in and clock out. Now, as far as a server or a bartender that is only working 1 tip job, my suggestion is to make sure that side work prior and after don't take more than 30 minutes. And anything that's done throughout the shift, as you're waiting on tables, you're filling glasses, making coffee, stuff like that. That's all tip producing. But if you were doing that for 30 minutes are more than 30 minutes after your shift and had no more tables, I think you could argue that that is no longer tip producing. And if you were performing those job duties for more than 30 minutes, you absolutely should be paid the full federal minimum wage.
Really interesting stuff. As always, man, I love learning stuff from you. Thank you so much, Brian, on the dual jobs and the 80/20 rules that are rolling down the pike coming December 28th to federal courts near you.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian Smith. Have a great afternoon, man.
You as well. Take care.
Cheers.